You're listening to Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. I spent the last 4 years trying to discover how to break the burnout cycle. And as a high achiever in a fast-paced world, it's very easy to slip back into old habits that leave you feeling overwhelmed and left behind. If you're anything like me, then you need to hear this. It's not your fault. Each episode is dedicated to help break the stigma around mental health in the workplace, end burnout culture for good, and the action steps that you can take today to do your part towards your personal growth and success. I am so happy that you're here today, and thank you again for joining us. Dex, welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway, and thank you for taking the time. It's pretty early in Australia at the moment to be joining the call.
It is, but that's fine with me. Thank you so much for the welcome.
So when it comes to your burnout story, where did it all begin?
Well, we're going right back there. I would say looking back on it, I would say I've been predisposed to burnout all my life. I had the right kind of stress profile, an anxiety profile, that I was always going to end up somewhere like that. But really my burnout incident was in 2017 when I had a very successful career as a software developer, and then in software leadership and corporate business. And eventually I kind of was, I don't know, I felt uncomfortable and I felt stressed and I was very anxious. I was doing very, very well in my job. I had a ton of success. It was kind of a game for me. It was quite easy and I loved it. And it was just a series of challenges in every business role I ever had and every software role, leadership role I had. It was just like, oh yeah, I can do this. This is fun. Let's try this. Let's try that. Let's try the other thing. And I went on and on for years like that. And I had a wonderful career that really suited my temperament. But it suited my temperament for reasons that ended me up in burnout, I think. And eventually, I worked at Citibank. We shouldn't name them, should I? I worked at Citibank for a year on a team developing fee structure for superannuation products. And at the end of 1 year, there was a team of 12 of us doing this change in the fee structure. And at the end of 1 year, they had a change in senior management and they canned the whole project and we all went home again. And after, millions of dollars. And now, in the closing days when I was there, I came into work one morning. It was about 7 o'clock and I got off the train in the city and there was a body on the ground. It was a big guy, a little bit overweight, and his face looked really grey. And I realized as I was coming past him in the tube station entranceway that he was dead. And I thought, even at that time, I thought, oh, that's me in the future. I just saw him there and I could imagine his life, Anyway, so I kind of switched a little bit and I went into the entrepreneurial space. I thought I need to get out of corporate. It's kind of getting on my nerves a bit. And I switched into the entrepreneurial space and I did a few entrepreneurial type jobs. I worked for a financial share market education company, and that was fun. And I remodeled their department and got a few products launched for them. And then I left that and I went into a startup. And that's when it really started, the burnout started catching up with me. I think all I've been doing until then is I've been outrunning it and outgunning it. Anyway, I went into this startup and it didn't ever launch. And it had been going for a couple of years. Again, I had a big team and they eventually folded, but they dispensed with a few people before they folded. And I was one of them. And that hurt my feelings because I wasn't really used to people getting rid of me. It really hurt my feelings. Anyway, I moved on to another startup, actually a startup about financial stress. And they hadn't launched either, but the founder was somebody I knew and we kind of worked on the product together. And this was the last job I had in IT, the last software job I had. And my role there was CTO, my whole mission was to help this founder launch the product. So we had a developer who was working overseas. It was a minuscule team. And then we did a lot of sales and fundraising activities together, myself and the founder, but I also was coordinating how we bring this app into the public domain. And I worked there for about 6 months, the entire time trying to launch really just the MVP, the minimal viable product. I just wanted to get something over the line so we could do some more intelligent testing and get some feedback and develop it out. But every time I wanted to launch the product, the founder found a reason why I couldn't. Oh no, let's go and make this video to do a promo. Oh no, let's do this research project together. Oh no, let's go and raise some money. Come to these meetings with me. And there was always a reason why I couldn't approach launching the product. And this was my Waterloo. This is, I think, the first time in my life where I had not been able to do my job. My speciality was launching products. He wanted me to launch a product. I'm good at that. I could see it all up, but I couldn't actually do it. And I didn't have anything else to do, really. And I turned up at work wondering what on earth I was going to do today and hoping he wouldn't ask me what I was doing, actually, hoping nobody would ask me what I was doing because I wasn't really doing anything. So I kind of felt like that job was the one that really painted me into a corner and made me confront all of my fears about failure, I think. And it all came up in a big bundle. And I just couldn't, I didn't have a way of dealing with it. And I didn't have anyone to talk to about it because I couldn't talk to the founder because that would have been embarrassing, shaming, humiliating. I really wasn't ready for him to see me not doing my job, even though he didn't want me to do my job. So I'd go in the office every day and I was a bundle of nerves. I just was dreading every day going into work, or wondering what I should do each day. And eventually I would have meeting after meeting with him going, please, can we just do this to get it out there? Can we just at least do some user testing? Or can we get a little tame group of people and launch it on them? Or nothing, And I went in one Tuesday morning and my blood pressure must have been through the roof. And yet I felt like I was redlining it physically. In my body, I could feel so much stress and so much exhaustion. I think a piece of me just wanted to collapse. And I said to him, let's have a meeting. So we had a meeting, him and me. And I said, okay, here's my latest idea for how we could get this thing moving. And he said, what we really need to do, I've got this thing where I'm raising some more money over here and I need you to come and help me with that. And in that exact moment, this little minnow of a thought went through my mind that if I didn't quit this job, it would physically kill me. And I'd never had that thought before. It was a new one. And I just thought, ooh, it kind of shocked me. And I thought, oh, you know what? That's probably true because my physical levels of stress were just bursting out of me. And I was just so flatlining and yet so full of nervous energy. And the two things were in massive conflict. And I was becoming ill. I felt like I was becoming ill because of this trapped stress. So I just said to him, well, that's it then. I can't do my job. So I'm going home today and I won't be coming back because I wasn't on a contract. I didn't have a notice period. It was a startup. So I'm leaving. We've had this conversation so many times. It always has the same conclusion. I can't afford to do it anymore. It's not good for me. I'm out of here. And I did. I packed up my stuff and I went home and I never went back. Unfortunately, the thought I had about stress killing me was correct because 2 or 3 weeks later, I was running on the beach at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning and I had a big heart attack and kind of collapsed and went to hospital. And I was in emergency surgery, and then they put me in ICU for a few days because they said, well, we're trying to keep your heart fluffed up, but it's not really having much of a go at it. And I was really, really sick and they were worried about me. And I lost my ability to do things like speak and understand language. I had something happened in my brain. I had these massive migraines. Something else was going on. Maybe I had a block in my brain as well, and it wasn't pretty. So afterwards they said, well, you need to go home and do nothing for 3 months because your heart needs absolute rest. It can't recover. It's a big block. It's a big trauma. It can't recover without 3 months kind of lying in bed. So that was that was the wake-up call I didn't really want. And I did that. I lay on my sofa and I thought, well, what to do? I don't know, nothing. And it was difficult to function. If you haven't had a heart attack, I can't recommend it at all because it's very difficult to look after yourself. It's difficult to move. It's difficult to feed yourself and do all your essential tasks. My body was just in advanced stages of exhaustion. And if I tried to walk around, my brain would just try and short circuit me and black out. So it wasn't very glamorous. And I spent the time on my sofa on the internet looking up, oh, burnout. I think I've got burnout. What do I do next? Because I recognized it was burnout before the heart attack. And I thought, okay, I don't know what to do now. I don't know. When I was in the job, I didn't know how to sort myself out. And now lying on my sofa, I still don't know how to sort myself out. I don't know who can help me. I don't know what to do. I don't know how I need to be helped. I don't know what the resolution is for burnout. But I did quite a lot of mindfulness work and very super gentle exercise. There's a bloke called John Kabat-Zinn who has a course called mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's kind of super slow yoga for people who can barely move, and meditation and breath work. So I did that for a while. Then I got mad because my temperament doesn't want to do super slow stuff. But anyway, that was kind of how it all fell out. And that was the beginning of recovery.
I like how you mentioned there about mindfulness, because that was something that was thrown at me early in my recovery as well. And people are like, oh, you need to be more mindful of things. You need to be able to be mindful. And when someone said being mindful and practicing mindfulness to me in the early stages of burnout, I was so numb to my feelings. I was so overstimulated by all the emotions that were going on when I burnt out that I didn't know how to process or regulate any of those emotions. So when anyone told me to be mindful, I was like, my mind is so overstimulated and full of thoughts right now. I don't know how to focus on one thought at a time. So mindfulness just went out the window for me. I was like, no, I need to. And again, same as you, when you're conditioned to do so much more, it's like you have 1,000 tabs open at once and you're trying to get everything done all at once. And when someone tells you just to no, close all those other tabs and just focus on one and focus on that one thought and just be mindful of that thing right now, it was impossible. So my personal approach, mindfulness didn't work for me. Again, as you also expressed your frustrations, like trying to do the slow yoga and things. That was something that I just could not do. I was like, no, I need something that's a bit more active. And I think one of the things that I thought in my early journey was, no, I need more exercise. And that's where I started running. And that became a form of escapism. It became a form of escapism because I didn't have to process my thoughts if I was in intense exercise. So it didn't actually help. But it was learning later on through trial and error, things like the mindfulness later on did help me when I was able to process those thoughts. But yes, it was the matter of slowing down. I think that was one of the first steps. Learning to slow down is one of the hardest things to do. But when you're burnt out, you kind of, and especially in your place when you had a heart attack, you were kind of put in a position where you were like, well, I've got no other way of doing this but by slowing down. It was part of your recovery. You're kind of put in the corner.
Yeah, it's a good point you made just then about being full of this nervous energy and exploding with it, but at the same time feeling completely numb. I think probably a lot of people can relate to that, and I certainly can. And I think when we run, because I've always been a runner, when we run, it is escapism, really, but it's also an outlet for this furiously tangled nervous energy we've got. We've got no way of kind of dispersing it. So running, I think, can be quite good. In my own case, mindfulness was not unfamiliar to me because I've studied Buddhism and meditation for quite a long time. I just didn't want to do it. Because for those of us in burnout, particularly towards the end of burnout, when we're flatlining with energy, we're completely exhausted, being in overdrive is the only weapon we have left. It's the only thing we know how to do, is throw more power at whatever the problem is, go harder and harder, get a bigger sledgehammer to crack the nut, is the only thing we have. So I think that people in the crisis point of burnout can't possibly slow down. Their nervous energy is so dominant, they're so frazzled that slowing down, if somebody had said to me, slow down, even though I knew I had to, and that's why I left my job, if somebody had said to me, you need to slow down, I'd have probably punched them. Telling them they didn't understand. So I'm not sure. Yeah, it's not necessarily the first cab off the rank, although we do need to come home to ourselves and become more connected with our experience. What's happening in my mind? What's happening in my body? What's happening in my nervous system? We do need to come home to that, but I think that going from 200 miles an hour to zero is like slamming ourselves into the sea in the Arctic. It's not going to necessarily have the desired effect.
It's funny how you mentioned that again about slowing down, that you almost had to reach the point of having the heart attack to slow down. No matter if anyone was to tell you to slow down, you weren't going to listen. 100% you're going to be in denial that you need to slow down, because I was the same when I had my panic attack. I was hyperventilating. I thought I was having a heart attack, but I kind of had to pull myself back and be like, Eugene, you're 27 years old. I really hope this is not a heart attack. This is not how you want to go at 27. And it I went to the doctor, explained all my symptoms, and she prescribed me with 4 weeks off work. And she said, do nothing but go for a long walk in the woods, go in the forest, and just listen to a podcast, or just take your time and calm. And she just takes a few weeks off work. And I was like, I can't do that. I've never taken 4 weeks off work. That's just not how I work. And she was like, and that's exactly why you need it. And it was such a foreign concept to me to take 4 weeks out of work. And I felt so guilty about it as well. I was like, but if I'm not at work, that means I'm leaving more work for other people to do. And I felt guilty trying to admit to my work colleagues why I was out of work. I was like, the fact that I needed to take a mental health break, that I needed to recharge my body so that I could get back to work. And I felt, even when I did go back after those 4 weeks, I felt guilty for such a long time that I had to make up for the time that I lost, which defeated the purpose of recharging myself. I went straight back into the cycle that had burnt me out in the first place.
And at your age, you can still get away with it too.
Yes, and I think that there are a lot of people around my age that are burning out, but failing to recognize it. And I'm pretty sure that, and you, especially in your career, the intensity of it, you probably experienced burnout, but didn't recognize it in the early stages of your career, to some extent, but probably maybe didn't address it, or were aware of it. But let's say we have that, let's say the overdrive that we use, that we just keep on plowing through it, or just keep on pummeling, and just be like, this is just who I am, and identify with that level of stress. But I think I just got to the point where when I recognized it, I was like, okay, I recognize it for what it is, but it could have been a lot worse. It could have been like, I could have been a lot worse
Well,
in terms of intensity. So
it could have
that
been, and it still can, because my experience of working with other people in burnout is Burnout's actually a progressive and degenerative condition. If you get it once, even if you resolve it, you're almost certain to get it again later, and it'll probably be deeper and longer. And that's one of the things about aging. Like at your age, you bounce back really readily. You know, at that age, we have got a barrel of energy and we can keep driving. But as we get older, the body and the system becomes less and less keen on staying in overdrive the whole time. We don't have that same level of energetic resource. So early in my career, I did go hard, but I would not describe it as burnout or burnout like or heading towards burnout until the last maybe 5 years. So I've had a pretty long career, right? But the last 5 years, I started to identify that the stress and anxiety and the overwork was becoming a problem. And the way I thought about work shifted. I'd gone from kind of meteoric and easy success to, yeah, successful, but I'm not feeling good about it. Still success, still creating the success, but not feeling so good. And my overdrive was starting to cost me in my body. And I could feel that I was having more accidents. I was having more illness. I was having more stress-related conditions. I think when you're young, yeah, you can get away with it. Being a bull at a gate, fine. You're just an alpha then, and that's cool. But towards the end, not quite so easy to get away with it. So it's more visible. And that time when I saw the guy in the railway station as well, like I looked at him and I just thought, I really don't want to be that person. What am I doing working in this high pressure environment in the city that isn't serving me? And then they just can the whole project and waste the whole year that I've blood, sweat, and tears has gone into. For what? For what did I do that? I think it's very well for anybody who is watching, Liz, if you feel that your stress and anxiety has become chronic to the point of not being easy to bear, if you feel that you may be the type of person who goes into burnout, if you're very, very hard driven, ambitious, perfectionist, always needing to succeed, invincible, you know, if you feel that that's you, then I would suggest you do something, take some action, because I don't think when you leave it, it gets any easier. And it takes a toll on the body and the nervous system after a while.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest parts, especially for me. I'm not sure how it was for you, but it was becoming aware of the fact that it was burnout and no longer being in denial of what exactly it is. I think for a lot of people hold shame around the word burnout, that they feel it's kind of like a double-edged sword, that people feel that they have to wear burnout as a badge of honor. Once you've achieved burnout, it means that you've achieved a certain level of success in your career that drove you to such a high intensity of stress and expense to your mental and physical well-being and emotional well-being, that you finally burnt out because of the high level of success you achieved. And some people burn out where they don't feel they've achieved that level of success, and they feel, oh, I can't openly talk about burnout because people think that, you know, I need to achieve a certain level in my career before I can burn out. I know some people who were 6 months into a new career and they asked for a sabbatical because they felt it was taking a toll on their mental health. And they were told, oh, most people in your level don't take a sabbatical until they're at least 24 months in. That's when people burn out. You're a bit early on your burnout. And I felt like, wow, this person is taking a sabbatical so that they don't get to that stage, so that they have a longer
Yeah.
career. It wasn't like they were trying to pull a fast one and go off on 2 weeks holidays to Ibiza. It was, no, I want to take care of myself so that I can pursue a longer career here. And this, I think, and then the other edge of the sword is that people have the shame about admitting to stress and overwhelm in their career, that they feel that it's going to put a stopper in their success or their progression, that it's going to plateau their career if they admit that, oh, I can't handle this level of stress. that they feel they're going to be put in a box that, oh, this is the amount of stress this person can handle. They can't progress any further than this. So there's like two big obstacles to people opening up about how to talk about their mental health and how to talk about burnout.
Yeah, well said. And I meet a lot of people who are burnt out of school or college. So I think what's happening is the age when people experience burnout, the age range of people who experience burnout has expanded enormously in our current culture, which is one that cultivates this condition. But I also see that there are industries that cultivate burnout by the way that they train their professionals. For example, medicine, law, accountancy, teaching, engineering, IT. We're all trained to harness ourselves at the maximum power we possibly can for a lifetime. So a lot of people in those professions have been burnt out since the beginning, but they've just tried to keep running harder because that was the expectation. And I think one of the reasons we find it difficult to slow down is we don't know what plan B is. Because I would have done anything rather than give up my career. But towards the end, when I was getting into burnout, I just thought, I can't stop because my career will crash and I'll never get it back. And I had a lot of shame as well. I had a lot of embarrassment. I felt small and humiliated. But a lot of people as well that I meet have been stood down from work. They've either had some physical condition or some mental stress and stepped away, or they've been stood down by their organization with panic attacks, with inability to function from stress levels. And I think it is wildly inappropriate that that's dealt with in a shaming way. Oh, you should be working harder. Because if there's one thing that people in burnout do not lack, it's motivation and work ethic. They'll do anything and everything to keep going and solve all the problems. So I think shaming and blaming those people is unfortunate. I really do. And I do think that the culture we live in, where we're subtly expected to be in the top 1% of performers, well, I mean, do the math. How can we all be in the top 1% of performers? We can't. But we're so driven now to see ourselves as aspiring to this top level. And it's an impossible goal. So we do keep thrashing and feel inadequate if we haven't got there. So a lot of people I work with haven't achieved those massive things in their careers because they're so smashed before they even begin. They come into the workplace with a high load of stress, their baseline of stress and anxiety and shame and insecurity is pretty high. So it doesn't surprise me that there's people in that strata starting out with their careers are also suffering. I don't think it bodes terribly well for things.
Another reason why I bring this up is because when I first started the podcast and started talking about my mental health at work and recovery and different options that are available to people, I received a lot of negative backlash, more than I had
Yeah.
than I had expected or anticipated. But I didn't take it the wrong way. I just realized it was a lot of people who were not comfortable talking about their mental health. It was still a very taboo subject for them. And I was told that talking openly about being stressed at work is career suicide. No one is ever going to want to employ you if you say you're stressed at work. And I just told them, I was like, the only reason people get stressed at work is because they care about the work that they do. They must care enough to let it actually affect their health. Whether it's caring about the job or caring about why they're working, whether they need the money for their quality of living, for their family, for their loved ones, they must care enough about that work that they're not, going straight off to another job or trying to work for a different company. They have some bit of loyalty to that company if they're going to let that level of stress affect their health. So it should not be seen negatively by a company if someone reaches out and says, look, I really care about this work, but I need to set a boundary for the sake of my health. If you want me to do this work, properly. I don't want to cut corners. I want to work to my utmost potential here. So rather than people quiet quitting and doing things behind the scenes and trying to look busy rather than putting in the work that, they feel gives them purpose, makes them feel good about themselves and good about the work that they do, makes them feel more stable and secure. If people were more open about how they feel at work and felt that it was a comfortable, safe space for them to do so, to be able to speak to their manager, to speak to human resources, that there are resources available. That there's someone made a comment to me before about human resources and just how it makes them feel when they feel they can't approach their company. They say that is human resources for humans or humans as a resource?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we get a sense if we speak up about our stress at work, it is like breaking ranks. We're speaking the unspoken universal truth, which is that the workforce nowadays has a much higher level of stress than they can handle. But breaking ranks is so unacceptable. And I think it makes us feel like, oh, not a proper man, or for women as well, not a proper woman if we can't handle the amount of demands and stress that's placed upon us. And my discovery with people that I've met in burnout, and I've met an enormous number and a very big range of demographics, is that they're universally amazing, wonderful, talented, rich, committed human beings. And they do have, although burnout encourages us to go completely numb and shut down and isolate, usually, all of those people had amazing hearts and they wanted to serve. They wanted to serve their organizations and they really wanted to serve the people around them as well and support the people around them. So I think this culture of shaming people for speaking up about stress, they're pointing the finger in the wrong direction. And I think the reason that HR can sometimes be reactive about that is because their allegiance, as you say, is in a different direction, but also because they don't know how to fix the problem. They just don't know. And I work with a lot of HR people as well, and they don't understand the problem, let alone know how to fix it. And I find that is the biggest area where we can improve, is we can give HR the resources to recognize the problem, to recognize how to support any person who is experiencing those difficulties, and how to correct that, how to give them a root cause rectification, give them resources to help them feel fundamentally better, not externally better, but right in the depth of themselves, to feel good as a human being again. Because then those people will spring back to the amazing performance that HR would like to get from them. They'll always come back to that if they're operating in a workplace in a different mode, a more self-serving, a more resourceful, a more heart-centered mode, really, than they've been doing in this stress, must try harder, burnout mode. It's available, but I think it's not well understood.
Yes, I see that especially when we're trying to end burnout culture in the workplace. And a lot of people jump the gun straight away and they're like, it's the company's fault. The companies are wearing us down. It's my bosses to blame. And they're forgetting that they're talking about other humans working in the company too. These are people who don't understand burnout. People who don't understand, maybe they understand that their team is burning out, but they don't know how to help them, and the resources are not available for them to offer, or maybe they're just not aware of what resources are available to them that they can offer to their teams. So they find it easier to hide behind um, mantras around, that, oh, you need to work through this. Or some people, their bosses are so stressed out as well. Their bosses are probably burning out too. And one of the most common responses that I've heard from people when they complain, when they're cynical and they have all the early signs of burnout, and they're like, oh, I just can't do this anymore. I'm feeling so stressed. I'm so overwhelmed. And someone says, I've been feeling that way for the past 20 years and I just keep on working. So buck up. And it's the most demoralizing thing to hear from a senior manager, that they're invalidating your mental health and your well-being, and that you're just not competent enough in your role, rather than seeing, oh, I feel like that too. Maybe we should get help so that you don't end up in the same tired state as I was. You know what? Instead of, just empathizing with people, empathizing and being like, I feel that way too. I understand what you're going through. Let's see if there's a better way of doing this. Maybe you'll have a longer career, or maybe the whole team will work a bit better if we had more energy and a bit more enthusiasm, rather than working people to the bone and being like, oh, we'll just get a young guy to start next year. We'll get a few students in and burn them out too in a couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that cultural shift is happening. But I mean, if there's a manager who's in this roughly the same level of stress and burnout as somebody who comes to them in their team who's in burnout, the fear is automatically going to be, I don't know what to do with you, but I can't even listen to that, because what if I'm in the same position and I don't know how to fix it for myself? But it is a solvable problem. But when you think about it, like when I see people who are experiencing burnout, they are these amazing humans, a massive untapped resource when they're in good form, and they can be brought back to good form. So they're still a huge asset to a business. So if we can work successfully with those people, they will propagate the solution through their teams as well. They don't just become a personal resource then. They become a resource for everybody around them, because now they can be fully human. To recover from burnout is to become fully human and find the good in everybody. And then they can propagate the kind of healing energy of that. They know how to work with people to help them stay on board in a more gentle way. But if we look at the kind of people who end up in burnout, it's what they would have once called type A personality. Type A isn't, in fact, a personality. It's a set of behaviors that we exhibit that can be changed. But type A, the term type A was invented by two cardiologists who discovered that the men in their waiting room were wearing down the front end of their chairs in the waiting room, and all them, they were all fraying on the front of the chairs, and they wanted to know why. And they did this study of those people and their stress profiles, and they came up with the set of behaviors that are what we now call type A, what they call type A, which is this hard-driven, aggressive, ambitious, high standards, perfectionist, and all of this assembly of behaviors that accelerate our progress into burnout and therefore do bring heart attacks on. Wonder who can relate to that. But those behaviors can be modified. And if we even take one of those, perfectionism. So most of us in burnout have extremely high standards, as well as being very hard driven, very demanding, impatient. We want to be perfect all of the time. But if we look at perfectionism alone, the reason that humans develop this perfectionism is because when they were younger, they weren't accepted for who they were. They were only accepted if they performed well. Maybe it's in sports, maybe it's academically, maybe it's in the home. However it was, it was expected of them to perform, and they were rewarded for performing, and then they were punished for not performing. So all of their lives are like, oh, well, I need to keep performing then, don't I? I'll just try really hard. I mean, essentially, that's one of the drivers of burnout right there. And I can never feel good enough, never, ever feel good enough. If I'm only as good as my last act that went well, I'm never going to relax, am I? So recovering from perfectionism is a real amazing resource, a path out of burnout, because perfectionism does not add performance. It doesn't improve performance. It doesn't change performance, because the perfectionist is already very talented and very driven to achieve. They're already doing their best. Perfectionism only adds stress and procrastination. It doesn't have anything good.
As you can definitely relate to in that startup, He was definitely a perfectionist, and it was
Yeah.
definitely holding the whole company back, the whole startup back.
And the startup before that was the same. They never wanted to launch the product. They never wanted to, they ran for 4 years, I think it was. They never wanted to tell anyone they had a product. They just wanted to keep getting more funding and have more fun and a table football machine. I think it is interesting, the startup culture altogether. And it's interesting that we've got it in this era, that the startup culture is, went through such a boom, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's something that has always fascinated me about startups is I I always thought startup was just the beginning phase. It might take 6 months to a year and then they move on. But I hear about
Yeah.
startup companies and there's people who have been there for years, and I was like, oh wow, these people must be there for years because they're starting up loads and loads of different companies, and that's what they do. They just keep on start. And but I didn't realize they were the same companies that are startups for years. So is it that, as you're saying, is it because they're procrastinating? They're always perfectionists, or like I do understand that some companies, when it comes to, let's say, like software development and things take years. But I always thought that, as you said, you want to launch an MVP, a minimal viable product, and then get feedback, and it gets out to the market, let's say early access and things like that. But I didn't realize so many people hold back because they're trying to perfect something. But there's only so much we can do in our own heads. We need to get something out there. We need to,
Yeah,
again,
you can't.
take the action.
Yeah, you can't please a market you're not in touch with, because you'll never understand what they need. Without that iterative process, you can never please your market because you will never know them deeply enough. They will never tell you what they need if you don't test stuff on them. Because we make a whole set of assumptions. I know what you need. You need all these things here. I'll build them quietly for a few years in the background and then launch them on you. And lo and behold, if you do launch, then the market will not respond well because you've never asked them what they wanted. It can't possibly work. And for me, the way I look at startup culture now is it's enormously attractive to people who want the buzz, who want the prominence, if you like. They want the profile of working in a startup. It's very attractive to our egos, and it draws in people who will fossick away in the background and never produce anything. That's the kind of people who are pulled into it because they're so safe. Keeping your product to yourself and never talking to anyone about it is so much safer than saying, here's my little baby, do you like it? It's actually I think of it as a kind of quite addictive process to just stay in the buzz and the excitement and the promotion and the fundraising part. It's like, oh, look at me, I'm doing this great startup. And then putting your baby out there is the single most difficult thing for somebody in a startup at any time of the process. But the earlier, I mean, the sad thing is, the earlier you get your baby out there, the easier it is. With time, it just gets harder and harder. You've got a bigger stake.
Yes, I think I like I always, when it came to my burnout and all the self-sabotaging behaviors that came with it, my three fundamental pillars in terms of recovery are around awareness, compassion, and self-care. And I think that's exactly when it comes to that inner critic, that thing that the perfectionist that holds you back from, that shames you from ever talking about your burnout, from ever talking about anything that's holding you back, anything that makes you who you are, that makes you anything less than the big, strong ego that you have created, or that narrative you have told the world, but you never want them to see the truth. And the longer that you go without sharing that, you think in your head, you think, okay, the longer that I can hold up this facade, the stronger I am. Whereas being truly vulnerable and honest and transparent and authentic is what gives you that strength. And that's sometimes one of the hardest obstacles for anyone to break. to be able to be true to yourself and show yourself that kindness and compassion.
Yeah, and the ego seems so self-protective, and we need it more and more as we get into this process. The ego becomes stronger and stronger because we're on the edge of suffering much too keenly, and it gets worse and worse with time. But it doesn't actually have that function. That's what it says on the packet, but it's not delivering, right? We don't feel good. This ego is trying to protect us, but we still feel terrible and terribly at risk and vulnerable, even though we don't want to feel vulnerable. But I think that I'm with you in the awareness and self-care side is super, super important. But from burnout, it's very difficult for us to access that mode or even be willing to look at that. But when we numb our negative emotions, so if we're numbing out our fear and our anxiety and our stress and our despair, we're also numbing out our positive emotions. So we're suppressing all the things we don't like, but we're also suppressing all the goodness of us. So really, I think of burnout recovery as a homecoming to the pre-existing goodness that's still in us. It's just coming home to being authentic, like you've said, and just, I call it championing ourselves. We'll be our strongest advocate, our kindest and most gentle supporter. We've actually got to love ourselves. There's no other way you can do it. We can dismantle our inner critic. We can learn to approve of ourselves and accept ourselves for who we are and let the good out, because the good is still there. This is where I think when people get their mojo back after burnout, it's really just coming back into contact with all the stuff that's already good about them. We don't need to develop new skills. We just need to come home to who we really are and go, this is me. I'm already fine. I can't act my way to being a good person. I'm already a good person. And we can learn to champion ourselves as if we were looking after a little tiny kid going, because each of us has got this little tiny kid inside that's never really quite felt good enough. And I think that's it sounds a little bit like navel gazing, but we get to support our own psyche, not from the ego, but from the heart, because the heart is probably the best thing about us. We've got a good, strong heart. It's a kind heart and a generous heart. It can be generous to us and it can be generous to other people. And we can also come back to a place, I think, where we outperform our previous best before burnout. We don't sacrifice any success or any performance for this. We actually go to a higher level of performance than before, but it's much easier and more fun. And we like being around people again. We're okay. We can relax with people and we can support people like we always wanted to. I just think the fountain of what comes back after burnout is people just flourish. They just open up like flowers. We're like, wow, I didn't know it could be this much fun. I didn't know I could have this much kind of reward and fulfillment and connection with people. And I think most people in burnout would call me crazy for saying that, because when I was in burnout, I was like, no, you don't understand. The whole world has collapsed on my head. I'm dead. I've got nothing left. But it's just not true. It's not true.
Yeah, even you just reminded me there, especially when you're talking about the numbing of your negative emotions. It's almost like you try to dull them, but it also dulls your positive emotions. And it just reminded me of 8 months before I completely burnt out. I saw the Foo Fighters at a concert. And I mean, I saw the Foo Fighters about 10 years before that, and it was amazing, ecstatic, torrential rain, everyone, like the spirit and everything, and I was a mile back. And this time I saw them, I was maybe only about 200 yards away from the stage. And I remember feeling nothing. I didn't feel any buzz or anything. I wasn't drinking or anything, but I still wasn't feeling the music the same way. And my best friend turned to me and was like, "Are you okay?" And I just turned to him and I said, I'm not feeling the buzz of the music. It's just," and he knew something was off because like we go to rock concerts everywhere together. And he was like, "Are you sure you're okay?" And I was like, "I don't know what it is, but I know something's not right because this is the Foo Fighters and I'm not jumping around. I was just standing there listening to the music. I was there, but I wasn't present." And I
Yeah.
think that was an early sign where I knew something was off, but I didn't know what. And it's only just now that you mentioned it there. I had dulled so many of the negative emotions that I had also dulled the positives. And a lot of the time, when people are in this burnout cycle or in this state of high stress and they identify so much with it, that they're like, oh, this is just who I am. This is what I need to do in order to maintain this level of success and growth and progression in my life. I need to do this so that I can support my family. So I can't take the time to focus on burnout recovery or stress management or anything like that. This is just how my life is. But they don't realize at what expense and when is it all going to come tumbling down.
I think maybe they can get a glimpse of, of the expense from the way that they feel. And also this hideous disconnect from everything good that you've just mentioned in that music. Because really, burnout is a disconnection from ourselves. We're disconnecting from the shame and the fear and all of that. So we've shut everything down. So we're not connected to ourselves, which is the ultimate in pain. But also we've disconnected from other people. We've isolated and withdrawn from other people. So the antidote can really only be to reconnect until we do start feeling again, because when we start feeling again, we will start feeling the good. But that's not what our brain's telling us. Our brain's like, oh, do not let any more pain in. So I think it's an amazing example with you at the Foo Fighters. We really have deep frozen ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's another important part of recovery is what you mentioned there about reconnecting. That what we crave in life is aliveness. We need to feel alive. And if we're dulling our emotions and disconnecting from others, that aliveness can be missing. The same as deep connection. We need deep connection with others. Often we cut ourselves off if we're so focused on our work. We forget about our loved ones. We forget about investing time in relationships with others, with our friends, with our family, that even though we get so immersed in our work and we tell ourselves that we're doing it for them, when was the last time we had a fully present, connected conversation, a fully engaged conversation with them? And that's a
Long
very
time.
hard thing. That's a very hard thing to admit to. Once you have that awareness and you're like, when was the last time I was fully present and not thinking about emails, not thinking about what I had to do tomorrow, what about my deadlines? When was I fully present in that conversation?
And that's why a lot of the people that I meet in burnout are having marital problems or problems with their children as well. All of their relationships have just gone. Uh, this is really driven in burnout from shame, as you've mentioned earlier on. But when we think about shame, shame is telling, shame is different from guilt, right? Guilt is I've done something wrong, I need to make amends. Shame is I am something wrong and I can't fix it. So shame is something that's given to us when we're children. Somebody taught us to be ashamed of ourselves. And as you know, I mean, the first 7 years of our lives, we have no analytical capabilities. So if somebody tells us in the 7 years to be ashamed of ourselves, we'll just take that on face value, live it out for the rest of our lives. But the shame that we're given is somebody else's shame. Kind of comes down a bloodline. Somebody before us was ashamed of themselves. They were taught that as kids. Then they teach us that as kids because it seems protective. Now, kids, don't be like this because you won't, be successful in the world. But shame's essentially, it's fiction. It's made up. It's not really about us. It never was. So we believe that we should be ashamed of ourselves, but really there is no basis for that. So one of the things that it's most helpful to do is to help people unwind their shame story so that they see that they're a fully acceptable human being, that they're good enough now, that they've always been good enough, that their heart is good enough, their work is good enough, their love is good enough. Everything about them is already good enough, is to bring them back to, I think, to that place. And the power of that realization, I think, is the bedrock of recovery from burnout. And I think people need to hear that their shame is not them. Your shame, if you have shame, it's nothing to do with you. It's just somebody's played pass the parcel with you. Here's your shame. Oh, okay. I must be terrible. You're not terrible.
And in recognizing that, you're recognizing a starting point of recovery. So when it comes to recovery, what do you feel are the fundamental stages of recovery when it comes to burnout?
Being willing to see yourself as worthy, come home to yourself, inhabit your full self and all the goodness of you that you shut down in burnout. Because that's why we feel so terrible in burnout, is because we look at ourselves and everything looks doomed, looks awful, looks painful. We can't find anything inside ourselves that seems like, we can run with the ball on. But it's just because we're looking the wrong way. So what I do with people is I take the barometer out of stormy, where we're just self-criticizing ourselves to death, back into sunny, where we suddenly realize again we're a good person. So I basically help people see the good in themselves and connect with the good and feel it, feel the positive emotions of that. And then all the energy floods back again. And the capacity, the resilience, the strength. I help people fill their own cup of goodness so that it overflows onto everything in their world. That's how I say. Because everybody really, I believe in them completely, and I will champion them as I'm teaching them to champion themselves, to be their own best advocate and strongest ally, and just to relax. We can afford to relax into who we truly are, because who we truly are is amazing. It's just the external measure of that we've chosen isn't reflecting the truth.
But even, let's say, as you said, just flipping the barometer, for a lot of people, that is such a foreign concept because they're, again, so numb to their emotions. Whether they're understimulated or overstimulated, they just cannot process or regulate all that emotion that's going on. So, what would be the first step that someone could take if they are in a state of extreme burn, they've hit rock bottom burnout, and they know they've come to the awareness that I need to do something, but this whole idea of mindfulness is too much right now. This whole idea of sitting in a room and doing a bit of slow yoga, it's still too much to be left alone with your thoughts. I think that's one of the hardest struggles. It's not that I can't do anything, I'm too exhausted to do anything. As much as you're physically and mentally exhausted, the idea of processing your thoughts takes a lot more focus and energy than you're capable of. You would rather go for a 10-mile run than to sit alone with your thoughts when you are burnt out. So what would you suggest as the first step in terms of flipping that barometer to sunny?
Good question. When we lack enough energy to do anything useful, we've got just nothing in the tank. The thing that restores energy most quickly is to get some glimpses of the good in ourselves that we've lost. So our inner critic is on fire all day, every day, telling us we're shit. This way, that way, the other way, always have been, always will be. That inner critic is what depletes our energy. It's like bashing your head with a rock every 5 minutes. So one of the early things that I do teach people to regulate and feel their emotions and be less scared of them, but I also teach them to see through the lie of self-criticism, to see that it's not true, and where they fear the criticism of others, to understand deeply that somebody who criticizes you isn't actually thinking or looking at you. They're thinking about themselves. when we criticize another human, what we're really doing is saying, wow, if I did what you did, I'd be really mean to myself about that. And that's what's filling their head, because 99% of the time as humans, we're thinking about ourselves. We're not thinking about other people. They're just objects. So if somebody criticizes you, what they're really saying is, oh, that's not okay. And I really don't want to go there myself. I would really be nasty to myself if I did that thing you did, because it doesn't align with the values I've been given. So I'd be really dirty on myself about that. So I'm just going to be really dirty on you to make sure it doesn't apply to me, because that would be too scary. So the whole concept of other people criticizing us is just, it's just a cook-up. It's not actually real. So I teach people how to find their own strength and let criticism and self-criticism be disarmed, if you like. I teach them a very specific method to do that, where they stop taking criticism so seriously and give the goodness in them a little bit more airtime. I teach them how to recognize the goodness, because they can't see it, right? In burnout, who can see what's good in them? They think there's nothing left. So I teach them how to look at the goodness that has always been there and remains. And that's how I helped them swing the barometer back originally, because that's what builds a little bit of strength and a little bit of energy back and a little bit of hope. Because we need hope so badly when we're in burnout.
And if anyone wants to flip the barometer with you, what's the best way they can get a hold of you, Dex?
Well, I'm at dexrandall.com.
Simple and clean. I like it.
I like people to come and have a chat with me, and we'll just talk about, what difficulties they're having and how they can be solved.
Yeah. I love it. Dex, it was great having you on the show, and I definitely look forward to chatting with you again.
Super. Thank you very much for hosting me today. It's been really enjoyable shooting the breeze and hearing your ideas as well.